On the planet Earth, human beings are considered to be the most advanced living entity due to their intellectual capacity and emotional complexity. Most of us today does not even use one fourth of our intellect, whereas our ancestors were extremely wise and are therefore considered godlike or someone very close to God. Most of the wisdom they gathered were a result of investigative thinking, observations, experiments, and never settling down. Initially, the grief of losing a loved one and the fear of natural calamities made men want to stay together. They questioned if there was something they could surrender to, something they could rely on that can vanquish their grief and fear. They continued to seek and eventually they came across something astonishing that set the creation of Sanatana Dharma, the very root of Hinduism. Let us now go over the circumstances that led to this. The primitive men thoroughly observed life and objects around them. To aid their investigation, they focused on two aspects of man, the mind and the body. When analyzing the body aspect, they figured that men required food to sustain their body and food came from earth. They identified water was essential to sustain life. Agni or heat was fundamental in digestion and assimilation, hence sustained life. Vata or air was essential in circulation of blood, nutrients and waste. Space was essential in holding food, byproducts and waste in the body. This led to the conclusion that body of a living being was made up of Panchabhutams or the five essential nature elements, and that in itself is what sustains human body. They moved on to analyze the mind aspect. The origin of human mind baffled our ancestors a lot. They wondered if mind, just like the body, came from nature. They seeked and eventually realized that the mind did not originate from nature. Now, how did they conclude that? What was obvious to them was a child that was born came from the body of a woman, which is sustained by the elements of nature. This child would look very similar to his or her parents as they were bound to each other's body at some point. However, they observed that none of the children that came from the same parents had the exact same mind. No two persons behaved or thought the same. Even the twins appeared unique in their thinking, although they appeared the same in looks. Their minds were also unique and distinctive. If their minds did originate from the body of their parents, just like their physical body, their minds should also be very alike to their parents and siblings. This finding helped our ancestors conclude that the mind of a person did not originate from nature nor is sustained by the elements of nature. Death has always been as popular as life. Every time someone lost their life, their body is simply a biodegradable object which is incapable of any action. It's almost like the person you were communicating to were hidden behind the body that now doesn't move. What you have seen is the body, but the person you have spoken to all this while was someone within that you never saw. When they die, their body is shed and the person leaves. We generally call this the soul leaving the body. Our ancestors wondered if what really leaves during our death is the mind of the person. However, this thought came to an end when they realized something new. They observed that when we are asleep, our consciousness or our mind wakes up before our body does. If this was not true, none of us would be able to stay half asleep and think in our head if we should sleep further or get up. Then came the question that answered all their previous questions. Who wakes up the mind? Name it what you want, the X factor, God, universe, etc. Our ancestors realized that which wakes up the mind and sustains it in a state of consciousness is the invisible force they have been seeking. They understood that the intangible, invisible energy source that wakes up their conscious mind every morning is really the origin of their mind. They exclaimed that this intangible force is the absolute truth and they called it Brahma. They further realized, just as a body goes back to its origin, which is nature, the journey of the mind only completes when it reaches its source, that is the intangible force or God. And once it does, that consciousness or mind is set to attain moksha. This is what is commonly called as liberation of soul. So the process of birth and death continues until the consciousness of a person reaches that divine force. This theory further validates the zero energy universe hypothesis, which proposes that the total amount of energy in the universe at any given time is zero. This intangible force is identified to be the most supreme and indestructible. Hence, they named it Sanatana, which translates to eternal or indestructible.